Hello friends, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Sona. I'm a content creator, journalist, mom of 3 toddlers, 3 and under, and I'm an Orthodox Christian. I thought it's about time for me to make a testimony video where I would share my journey of becoming an Orthodox Christian with you, with the key reasons why I chose Orthodoxy at the age of 16 and why you should too. If you are someone considering becoming an Orthodox Christian, my journey, my experience might be helpful to you, since I think it's rather unique, as are all experiences of people coming to Christ. So let's get right into it. I knew that I'm a Christian since I was very little, maybe 3 or 4. Even though my family was not religious, we would barely ever speak about the existence of God, and I was baptized much later in my life. Still, somehow I knew. I have been praying since I was a preschooler. No one ever taught me to pray, and I don't remember what I was praying about, but I'm certain I was praying to Jesus. I got to know him first through the albums with the copies of famous paintings from the galleries around the world that my grandparents had in their library. Ancient art, medieval art, and Renaissance were fascinating to me. I especially loved Hieronymus Bash. He's such a treat for children's imagination. We didn't have religious objects in my grandma's house, but we did have that collection of albums from the galleries around the world. I remember one time I woke up in the middle of night with a tummy ache. That night I was spending with my grandparents and I wanted my mommy and I was crying in pain, and my grandpa, not knowing how to help me, he lifted me up, put me on his lap, and opened the London National Gallery album, and he started to tell me stories about the people who were on those paintings. One of those paintings was Christ Mocked, Crowning with Thorns by Hieronymus Bash. I have never seen a face so meek and humble, yet strong and peaceful. There was deep sadness to it, but no anger or resistance. I studied the painting with my little eyes, and then I asked my grandpa, why are these people hurting him? And my grandpa said, because he's different from the rest of them. I remember I thought about it for a bit. The contrast between the expression of Jesus and his tortures were so stark that I then asked my grandpa, why is he not angry with them? And my atheist grandpa said, because he forgave them. I stayed in that moment for a little longer, and then I remember I lifted my head and I realized that the tummy ache was gone and I was feeling much better, and I just knew instantly that Jesus is going to be the main character of my story. It's important to know that even though my family was not religious, I grew up in the 90s. I was born and grew up in the 90s in Armenia and then in Russia, 2 countries with very distinct Christian cultures. That culture was rising from this Soviet slumber and was blossoming at that point. Of course, not only Orthodox Christianity was preached from all the corners of post-Soviet territory. All the religions were now available for people to study, including some very dangerous cults and sects with some self-proclaimed religious prophets and teachers who deceived many people. A lot of religious programs were shown on TV, religious books were printed. I remember seeing a lot of magic and psychics, and that revived interest in esoterica and ghosts, spirits, so on. But the ice has moved, as Russians say. The conversation about God was finally happening. The churches, the monasteries, after 70-something years of abandonment, neglect, and persecution, were finally restored, and the services became available for the masses. So there was this massive movement towards religion, massive interest in religion. And in Russia, as well as in Armenia, for the most case, people lived with this trauma of abandoning their faith. The destruction, the harm that was done is unimaginable. So many lives lost and culture lost, history lost. So in the 90s, for entire post-Soviet part of the world, this freedom was a wake-up call. Many saw this as an opportunity to set things right, to atone for the sins and restore what was rejected and lost. Of course, the memory of the Tsarist Russia resurfaced, the interest in that era resurfaced, and people became more interested in the pre-October Revolution history of Russia and other post-Soviet countries. Finally, the forbidden writers like Solzhenitsyn was printed. In Armenia, people finally started to openly speak up about the Armenian genocide and Sumgait pogrom. Unfortunately, Armenians didn't have much time to enjoy that freedom because very soon after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan started for Nagorno-Karabakh, for Artsakh. It was a very difficult time in Armenia, and my family was forced to immigrate to Russia, to Moscow. But at that time in Armenia, the war for territory actually became a holy war between Christians and Muslims, and the church became largely involved into this military movement. And life in Russia was not easy at that time either. There was a lot of chaos. But it did feel, at least for me, that I was living through a cultural renaissance. Of course, that time of freedom didn't last long, but I still think that the generation of 90s is the most independent and free-thinking generation in Russia. We didn't have time to contribute to the politics as much as we wanted to, and many of my university friends and colleagues immigrated and left Russia. But that freedom was real. It was real for a fleeting moment. So now I'm 11 years old and my family decides to finally baptize me and my father, who was not baptized, in Armenia. And that changed me forever. Before baptism, I was super extroverted, and I'm still an extrovert, but back then I really liked big companies and I developed early, so I was looking for validation from the opposite sex. I was still by all means modest little girl, but my mind was occupied by this glamorous world of American pop culture, Hollywood celebrities, models, beauty standards, boy bands, you name it. And you might argue that it wasn't connected to the baptism, but I think it was. My personality started to shift. I became more introverted. I started to appreciate solitude more. I started to pray more often, dream about my future in a different way, spend more time alone or with people who were much older than me. And most importantly, I became obsessed with books. I always liked reading, but at 12, I got this sudden rush, this sudden thirst for knowledge. I wanted to read all books in the world, especially classical literature. And I embarked on this journey to read all classical literature in the world. Of course, 19th century Russian literature became my all-time favorite. And if you know anything about Russian literature, it's very Orthodox Christian in its core. I also became fascinated by Shakespeare and Goethe. I started to teach myself to read and write in Armenian. I didn't know before that. I became interested in Armenian literature and poetry, and only a few months ago, all I could think about were Justin Timberlake's cute curls. That was a rather drastic change, don't you think? And I discovered that we had at home, hidden between other books, a New Testament. I still have that book with me. I really love it. It's so convenient to carry with you. And that changed everything for me. I started to read New Testament. Of course, I knew stories from the kids' Bible, but this was the first time I actually became acquainted with the original story. And my journey to Christianity, to really becoming a Christian, started with the New Testament. Now at 16, I started to attend university classes and I finally acquired some freedom to move around the city. Not too far, but I could still visit the Russian Orthodox Church next to my university. I would just go there, think, write, light a candle, maybe participate in the service for a little bit, and then go home. Gradually, I started to meet people there, Orthodox Christians, young people like me who had that thirst for Christ. I started to participate more in their church life and use volunteering opportunities. And I had a confession once with a Russian Orthodox priest. I even witnessed a miracle once there when the icon that I was cleaning was streaming mirth right in front of our eyes. But I still was not an Orthodox Christian at that point because I was not participating in the sacraments, which is what defines an Orthodox Christian, not just the baptism. And at the same time, time, I was studying the Holy Scripture and the works of the fathers of the church of both Oriental and Eastern Orthodox churches. And then I passed my exams to the university and I got into Moscow State University, and then the world was my oyster. I could go anywhere I wanted, and I immediately took this opportunity to explore all the churches in the city. I went to Lutheran Protestant churches and modern Christian Protestant churches and Catholic cathedrals and Russian Orthodox churches, and of course Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Church. Back then, Armenians only had 2 tiny churches in Moscow, and one of them was particularly hard to get to. So I went to the one that was a little more accessible to me. Again, I would just go, burn a candle, read the New Testament, sit there, pray, and leave. One time I was doing that, an Armenian priest approached me. He asked me about what I was reading, and I told him, and he said, "Why don't you come on Sunday to the Divine Liturgy?" And I promised him that I will, and I did. And I have been going to church since then. So what happened is I didn't know the rules, but I came to church on Sunday without having breakfast. I was absolutely blown away by the service, the music, and the people who were singing with the choir. I did not understand the majority of the service. It was in ancient Armenian, Garapar, but I was still fully engaged in what was happening. And then when everyone started to form a line to the Holy Communion, I went to that line. I knew theoretically what was Holy Communion, but I think I made this little prayer, something like, "I believe, help my unbelief," and I went and received the Holy Communion. When that happened, and I instantly knew that what I received was not just bread and wine. At that moment, I pledged my heart to Jesus, and I never looked back. I became an Orthodox Christian, and I found home in that church. In that parish, I found a lot of lifelong friends. Now, I could have become an Eastern Orthodox Christian. That path was available for me at that time, and I could have chosen it because I saw the works of the Holy Spirit in both churches, in Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches. People were equally nice and kind and warm and welcoming and pure in heart in both Armenian and Russian churches. Not everyone, but my friends were definitely very, very good people. And another thing was the language barrier. Church Slavonic, the language of the Russian Orthodox services, was easier for me to comprehend than the ancient Armenian Grapar. There were 2 main reasons why I chose Oriental Orthodoxy, Armenian Orthodox Church. First of all, Oriental Orthodox teaching, and at that time I was already familiar with the differences. The teaching of the one nature and one person and one will of Christ, where he was a perfect human and a perfect God, made more sense to me and was closer to my heart. And secondly, in Russian church, I was not allowed to the Holy Communion because I was baptized in Armenian church. So the priests in Russian churches, they wanted me first to confess before the altar that I was a monophysite and a heretic. And I really hope that everyone by this time knows that Armenians and Oriental Orthodox Christians are not monophysites but miaphysites. There's a big difference there. But they didn't know, and they wanted me to confess that I'm a monophysite and a heretic and then reject the heresy. I didn't mind rejecting monophysitism, but I did mind saying in front of the altar that I am a monophysite and a heretic. I was not. I knew that, and unfortunately many of the Eastern Orthodox priests did not know that. And so since I was not allowed to the Holy Communion, and in Armenian church I could receive it after confession, my real journey into Orthodoxy started with the Holy Communion. That factor contributed to me staying in Armenian church and becoming officially an Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Christian. Although I have to say that I still do have a lot of love and appreciation and respect towards Eastern Orthodox Church, especially Russian Orthodox Church. It absolutely breaks my heart seeing what is happening right now at church and seeing how best priests and preachers in church are becoming outcasts and scapegoats. Another reason why I remained Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Christian is because my church is my ancestors' legacy. Armenian history is so deeply intertwined with Armenian church history. Again, I was very much open to learn about other religions and other denominations, and I went to their churches and I listened to their preachers, but I still somehow found my way back home to Armenian church. And I started to participate actively in the life of the church. I started to sing in the church choir, participate in the trips and pilgrimages, and I started to learn ancient Armenian grapar to understand the language of the services better. With our church group, we traveled twice to Jerusalem, to Israel, to the Holy Land. That was an absolutely life-changing experience for me. My experience today with the Holy Communion is so much more intense than back then. But even that small push towards Him was enough for me to become an Orthodox Christian. Then in my 20s, I came to this country as a student. In Los Angeles, I found a wonderful Armenian church with a beautiful community. And I continued, working on my faith, deepening my faith in Christ and in the teaching of the Orthodox fathers of the church, singing in the church choir and reading the Bible. And I would love to do more of that. Now my situation is a little different. I cannot sing in the church choir. I have to attend to 3 kids, but that was a beautiful moment in my life. I hope it will come back. So then I got married and had 3 beautiful kids, and I graduated from grad school, and that journey brought me here to this channel. I could tell you much more about my journey of becoming and being an Orthodox Christian, but I really don't want to make this video too long. And if there is something I want to leave you with, is this. Since I was a teenager, I only missed the sacrament of the Holy Communion maybe 2 weeks in a row, except for the times when it was Great Lent in Armenian Church. The Holy Communion is not distributed during that period. And then when I was in my 40-day purification period after the birth of my kids. So except for those times, I wouldn't miss the Holy Communion more than 2 times in a row. And then in December, our whole family traveled to Peru. And there were no Oriental Orthodox churches there. There was one Eastern Orthodox church, which I absolutely loved, and I loved their community, but they wouldn't give me the Holy Communion. And then when I was left without the body and the blood of Christ for 4 weeks in a row, I started to understand what others experience, why there's so much anxiety and depression and loneliness and misery in this world. It's because people are not receiving body and blood of Christ regularly. I felt all those things that I was talking about, and it felt like the doors of my soul were left open and the enemy came and stole all of the joy that was there. After 4 weeks of not having a confession and not participating in the Holy Communion, I couldn't take anymore that storm of negative emotions that came down on me, and I had to do something. And I went to the Catholic Church and I confessed my sins there to a Catholic priest, and I definitely felt better immediately. I felt forgiven, and I even had this mystical experience during my confession. But only after I came back home and received the Holy Communion, I actually felt the joy coming back to me, the joy and the hope of being with Christ. I'm a sinful person. I am an ordinary person. I experienced loneliness and sadness and fear and lack of love, all of that. But that feeling of presence of Christ in my life never leaves me unless I leave Him first. And this is what I wanted to leave you with. Christ will not leave you unless you leave Him. And the Holy Communion is this seal between you and God. If you truly believe that during the sacrament, receiving Holy Communion, you do receive His real physical and divine body and blood, then He will abide in you. He will. So I hope this testimony was interesting and helpful to some. I would never think that as a woman I could make preaching gospel a career, but seems like that's what I'm doing now. Of course, apart from serving my family and my little ones. But your enormous support of this channel and of me matters so much to me. Your kindness and your generosity is the main reason why I'm still making these videos. Your kind and generous feedback motivates me to do more and is the reason why I'm still doing these videos. So thank you so much for staying with me till the end. God bless you. Stay strong during this period of Lent. Use this time to draw closer to God, to really connect with Him, and see you in my next video. Bye!